into these dark ages. They weren't dark, of course, to the people who lived in them, but they have been dark to us scholars, both because we haven't had as much evidence, but mostly because we haven't bothered to look very hard. With Jana's presentation bringing us through the end of the first millennium CE, some of those dark centuries have been illuminated, and now we will take this story even further thanks to Professor Bethany Walker, who is a professor of Islamic archaeology at the University of Bonn. She has done, like all of our speakers today, a lot of field work. She has done a lot of field work in Israel and in Jordan. She's co-directed the excavations at Khirbet Beit Mamzil in Jerusalem, and she now co-directs the new excavations at the medieval Khirbet Beit Loya in the Shvela. And she will talk to us about a facet of Jerusalem that Tehillah touched on and comes to even more vivid life, I think, in the Mamluk period, the commercial city. Bethany.
I really appreciate the invitation to join all of you today. Can you hear me? I don't speak very loudly. We're good? Okay, great. Some cities just perfectly preserve the hand of a particular patron. And we think here of Prague under Charles IV. We think of Florence under the Medicis, Cairo, particularly the old part of the historic town, the Bain al-Qasrain in the 13th through the 15th centuries under the Mamluks, and also for the medieval Islamic period, Jerusalem. And for Jerusalem, what develops in this Mamluk period of the 13th to the early 16th centuries is as much a business town as anything else. And if you think of it, even being in Boston, the highest buildings that you see, the cluster of the highest buildings, that's the commercial district, it's the banking district. And it was the true for pre-modern cities as well. Who are the Mamluks? The Mamluk dynasty is a very interesting period of medieval history. From 1250 until 1517, this dynasty of manumitted military slaves controlled much of the Eastern Mediterranean. This was a single generation of a military elite, and this means that if you became sultan, you worked your way through the ranks of the military and became head of state, you couldn't pass on anything to your sons or your daughters. They couldn't really inherit your power. Technically, your sons were not to come to power, but there is one period of Mamluk history where a dynasty was in the making. And it was during this period in the 14th century that we see a lot of investment in building, in construction, in agricultural development, and yes, in commerce in many cities of the Eastern Mediterranean, Jerusalem included. And what you're looking at is a painting done in the Renaissance by an Italian family of painters attributed to the Bellini school. You'll find the actual painting in the Louvre. And it documents a visit of Italian diplomats and merchants to Damascus, which was the capital of the Syrian province and the second city of the Mamluk regime in this period. Now, we don't really have many images of what Mamluks look like, largely because Islamic art is in public art and in public venues and iconic. So you're not supposed to portray living things, people or animals, but there are exceptions, and in private art you do get some images. And this is one rare image of what an emir, a general, looked like. So the Mamluks were the elite, the highest ranking soldiers, officers were, they rode horseback, they shot with bow and arrow, they had the opportunity to use guns at the very end of the regime and then gave it up, unfortunately for them. One of these emirs rose through the ranks very, very quickly, and it's his investments in Jerusalem in the commercial district in the center of the holy city, of the old city, that I want to focus on today. And his name was Emir Saifuddin Tankis. What does a Mamluk city look like in that period? Well, the fact is that many of the major cities in the Eastern Mediterranean that fell under Mamluk rule have the implant of the Mamluk investments on them. It's minarets, it's towers, it's domes, and lots of them. And in fact, the cityscape of cities like Damascus, Cairo, Jerusalem, Aleppo are dominated by these kinds of constructions, such as in Cairo and in Damascus, the second capital, and in parts of Jerusalem. And again, these are these parts of commercial activity of the 14th century we'll be looking at. Remember what I said about there are no images of emirs except for what we have on that Louvre basin. Unfortunately, in order to give you pictures of faces to look at, I had to go to gaming sites. And for some reason, there is a gaming site which includes these two Mamluks in them, where you can actually play out the character of these Mamluk figures. The one is a sultan, a very, very powerful and interesting sultan by the name of Sultan Nasser Mohammed. He dominates the politics of the Mamluk state for the first half of the 14th century. He ruled 3 different times and was deposed twice, from 1293 to 1341. And the reason he was deposed is that he didn't come into the military as a slave. He was the son of a sultan. He wasn't supposed to rule. And as a result, he became more and more paranoid and more power hungry. And he fortunately ruled at a time when the Mongol wars were over and the Crusades were over, and he could take all of the tax money and put it into investment. And he wisely invested in urban infrastructure and urbanizing through commercial activities, as did his leading officials. One of his other most important and trusted officials was Emir Tankis. So we know Nasser Mohammed through this. That's his blazon. So we don't know what his face looks like, but that blazon became the blazon of the larger family. And the blazon is associated with the Sultan's rule in the early 14th centuries. As far as Emir Tankis is concerned, Saifuddin Tankis, Ibn Abdullah ibn Hosseini al-Nasiri, was a very special case in Mamluk history. He rose quickly through the ranks. He was purchased by the Sultan Lajin, and when Lajin died, was assassinated, this emir passed on into the possession of a Sultan Nasser Mohammed, who immediately promoted him into his inner circle, the Khasakiya, which are the bodyguards, and was made the Saki, the cupbearer. The cupbearer was one of the highest ranked emirs, and he rose to that rank fairly quickly. So the cup comes to stand for this particular emir, and this register, by the way, you'll find on the Khan Tankaziya in Jerusalem, in the Old City. So look for the cups. The cup may very well be Tankis' blazon. He rose through the ranks quite quickly, becoming a quick confidant of Nasser Mohammed, even going with him to exile at Kara Castle when he was deposed after that second reign, and proved his loyalty, so much so that the Sultan trusted him until he didn't. And in the year then 1340, Tankis was imprisoned in the castle and the prison in Alexandria, and was poisoned by his dear friend Nasser Mohammed, who then died the following year. Such as Mamluk politics. Those types of problems in the political system, we'll overlook that. What I would like to focus on is for this period, the very, very long reign of this important Syrian governor. Tankis was the governor of Syria for a lengthy period of time, from 1312 till 1340. And in that time period, in Jerusalem alone, to him can be attributed 40 constructions, renovations, and also things that he oversaw or gave permission for other people to build. That's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. And what's special about Jerusalem in particular is that many of those buildings are still standing, and many of those institutions were still in use, as opposed to those in Damascus. Now, if you just compare the two lists, and I'm relying here on Ellen Kenny's very fine book, Piety and Power in Medieval Syria, particularly for the Damascus list. What is in yellow are investments that are directly commercial. What is in blue are urban projects that then helped the economy. And then you can kind of compare. So what we have is expansion of the extant marketplaces and investment in very uniquely Mamluk and medieval Islamic financial institutions, like the Khan, which is an inn for merchants, a place for them to stay, or the Caesarea, which merchants and also tradesmen, craftsmen can sell their goods and it can also stay. Bathhouses created a revenue that then were funneled into other projects like public services. And you'll see then there's a pattern here. Tankis was very, very active in commercial activity and urban infrastructure, namely water systems, cleaning out water systems and making them viable again, and demolishing old buildings and making the streets bigger, which allows more merchants to come in and more people to come in, and pilgrims as well. We know much more about his work in Jerusalem than any other city in Bilad Hashem, in Syria. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We have more buildings preserved. They're very, very well preserved. Not all of them, but many. Second, we have a lot of building inscriptions that document his activity. We have a lot of written records. His biographer of Safadi. We've got Mujahideen, who is a Jerusalemite of a later period that described his building activities, on Al-Ulami, who does as well. In addition to that, we have that type of very, very precious document. These are endowment documents. And waqf in Islamic, the legal system, was the endowment of revenue producing properties for a charitable purpose. It's not only charity, it's a business contract. So God owns the property, but the money gets used for all sorts of things. And all public services were financed through this kind of endowment system. That's where the money came from for all of Tankis's investments. He also invested outside of Jerusalem. And again, this list largely comes from Ellen Kenny's very fine book. And you'll see a pattern here, a pattern where the focus really is on financial viability, economic development, commercial centers. One very special case is the town of Ajloun, the bottom picture, where a town in northern Jordan, which was destroyed by a flood early in the 14th centuries. And Tankis made a very active effort to repair and to move people back in. People who left, he brought people from the villages in to resettle the town, the ruined town, and to rebuild the marketplace in particular. And it made it a thriving commercial center all over again. It's not only the towns he invested in, but this is important for some archaeology I'm going to bring to you in a couple minutes. It was also the countryside. So he took very careful management and supervision over water systems, draining swamps, reclaiming land, and investing in agriculture and opening up more farmland, more land to farming. And that takes some very interesting landscape turns, and we'll see what that looks like archaeologically. Okay, there are many salvage excavations in Jerusalem that have been done that have given us more information about the Mamluk period, but I want to focus on two that have ties to Tankis in particular. And the one is the salvage project that was started in 2004 by Tawfiq Dadli from Hebrew University and Hervé Barbet from the Israel Antiquities Authority. That excavation, again, was a salvage excavation during the restoration of a synagogue of Ohel Yitzhal that is in this district here. I don't know if you can see. You can't see my cursor, can you?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so without my reading glasses, I can't really see the map. But we're going from the Cotton Market Street down to the Tariq al-Wad to the Maghribi quarter. So it's sort of that area. And in that area, he did salvage excavations as the synagogue was being restored, and found two baths, two hammams whose revenues, according to those Waqf documents, were going to support some very important institutions in the city. And as they extended the excavations, they were able to explore the relationship between those two bathhouses and Achan and the cotton market. This was one of the most important commercial districts of Jerusalem in the Middle Ages, in the 14th century, the cotton market. Now, part of it existed as a general market before Tankis apparently became governor of Syria, but he built onto it. He built two baths, Achan, and extended the street of the cotton market then to the Bab, the gate of the cotton market onto the Haram Sharif. And here's what it looks like. This is the map in the book Mamluk Jerusalem of the cotton market and all of its business stalls. Two hammams that share a furnace room, and that it's sort of a floor plan of that emerging commercial district that develops in the mid-14th century. Now, what did those excavations look like? Really beautiful. Tawfiq came to Bonn to our Mamluk Research Center several years ago and presented fresh on these excavations. Really impressive. What can we see? One of these baths is perfectly preserved and has been in use until recent years. The other one still fairly well preserved, and the structures of them reveal construction that looks very Damascene. So it's likely that a lot of the craftsmen for his building in the Cotton Market District came from, like you see in the squinch work, literally came from Damascus. And we've got buildings built by him, sponsored by him, that look very similar. And then, of course, nearby was his madrasa, the Madrasa Tankaziyah, with its famous portal. And again, the construction of these folded cross vaults led the excavators to think that possibly the craftsmen came from both Damascus and from northern Syria. So these were real heavy investments to make not only a commercial district that's viable, but one that produces revenues to keep public services going. And it really was revitalizing and urbanizing. Now, if we move outside of the city into the countryside, we can learn some interesting things happening in the countryside, even if we don't have Saif ad-Din Tankis's name associated with this work. It's contemporary with his governorship. There is a pattern of hilltop castles, and the name of it's a qasr, and the plural qusur, the function of these changes over time. So the qusur as suburban getaway houses for Jerusalemites, like you have in the 19th century, is not how they functioned in this period. So in the Mamluk period and the early Ottoman period, these were fortified estates on hilltops. And there were many of them, and many of them we know in the 14th century were built and sponsored by the Mamluk political elite in Damascus and in Jerusalem. And we may have excavated one of them recently. In 2015 until 2019, I co-directed an excavation at a site called Khirbet Beit Mazmil which is between Ain al-Karam and the old city of Jerusalem. And if you know the city, it is right on the border between two Jerusalem neighborhoods, Beit Vegan and Kiryat HaYovel, right at the end of the light rail, the west end of the light rail. Most people had no idea that there was a site there. There's been a lot of development. It started off as a salvage dig by the Antiquities Authority, and then University of Bonn began also working there as a scientific excavation. Let's play Can You Find the Site? Do you see it? She'd be small. Ah, it's only a third of it's what, 3 hectares, a third of a hectare or something. It's very, very small. It's tiny. It's an isolated farmstead. Here you've got the floor plan of it. The one on the left is the complete plan from various Antiquities Authorities salvage projects and our excavation, which was this part, the joint scientific excavation. But on the right picture, the right plan, you can see the actual phasing. And what we have is a Mamluk period, predominantly 14th and 15th century farmstead estate, an agricultural estate, built on bedrock at the top of a very, very high hill that reuses previous walls. Some of them are Crusader, some may be Byzantine, but demolishes the rest of whatever was standing there that may not have been stable at the time to actually reincorporate in the buildings. Then it continues to be, you talked about ruins and revival of ruins and all of that. The ruins of this site continue to be later, after abandonment, relived in and revived and rebuilt, on and on and on until the 1920s. So it has a very, very long history. But we're interested in the Mamluk agricultural estate. Here's what it looks like as you enter. You have to realize you've got one estate built on top of the other. The dry stone structures on top are Ottoman. That's a family farmstead. They're built on more solid walls with mortar that are Mamluk. And the Mamluk site looks something like this. When the lower site was excavated by the Antiquities Authority, they found kilns, they found all sorts of industrial spaces, stables, with all of the equipment that you need for horses. In addition to, and what's special is that little glazed bowl to the left. And if you can make out the decoration, you may see that it is an Arabic inscription, and there's the beginning of a blazon on the other side. I'm sorry, it's not a cup. I wish it were, but it's one of those roundels that belong to Nasr Muhammad. So this is a perfect early 14th century, mid 14th century agricultural estate. Here's what it looks like today. Dry stone is Ottoman. What's below it is very solid Mamluk construction. And again, I would like to think of tying this to kind of the rural activity and investment that Emir Tankis did in various places of Syria, and particularly, I have to wait for that to come up, if it will come up, and particularly in Jerusalem. There were lots of investments in Jerusalem and Damascus in the countryside in agriculture as a way of supporting urban development. So the rural economy was tied in very, very tightly to the urban economy. Okay, the slide's not coming up, that's fine. What we had is a fantastic orthostat by Omer Zavi, who's one of my PhD students, of terraces. Yuval Gadot has done fantastic work, years of work on OSL dating of terraces, where he has documented this missing time period of the Mamluk period. And what we found is that many of the terraces outside of Mazmil are indeed Mamluk. And then there's a burst of activity in the Ottoman period. In other words, 13th and 14th, and particularly 14th century on, there's heavy investment in making really developing the farmland outside of Jerusalem, at least in this part of the Jerusalem hinterland. So, good reads. If you want to read more about Mamluk Jerusalem and Saifuddin Atankis, these are the sources that I pulled on. And I would like to mention, in really vile self-promotion, that the final report of Hirbit Beit Mazmil is coming out next year, from Equinox Publications. And as part of this same book series is other books on Jerusalem in the medieval period, including Benjamin Delinka's long-awaited book on the medieval pottery of Jerusalem. It will be coming out in the next 2 years as part of that series. Thank you.
It's amazing to have so many themes repeated. It's amazing. That is very exciting. Questions for, oops, got the sun coming directly in there. I'm going to come right back to you.
Hi, the
Hi.
district, the area you showed where they're selling cotton textiles, and then you said there's a furnace.
No, adjacent to that cotton market are the buildings that produced, that also were revenue producing for some of the local institutions. And those were two bathhouses. The two bathhouses were just south of the cotton market. Those are the ones that were excavated, and they were side by side, and they shared a furnace. So they were actually built at the same time.
Got it. Thank you.
1320s.
Well, I'm going to get you next.
When the Romans destroyed the temple, they threw a lot of massive stones over the side, and they were repurposed. So was that repurposing done during this period or another period? Can you give me some background on that?
All I can go on are the Antiquities Authority and Hebrew University excavations, and there was repurposed material in that. Whether it was Roman or not, I really can't tell you because I wasn't part of that project, and there wasn't a description in the published reports of that sort. What we can say from Mamluk construction in general is that they reused everything. So whatever stones were available there would have been reused, if not recut. This is what we see at Mazmil. It's a really heavily spoliated site. Mamluk masons did everything they could to save on effort and to build quickly, and they reused everything that was local before they started cutting new fresh stone. So I would not be surprised if that were the case.
Bethany, thanks for the great talk.
Hello.
I'm curious about the perforated decoration in the domes of the hammams, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the significance of the symbology of what that pattern of dots is supposed to mean, if anything.
Well, practically it's light. It's to let light in, and it's colored glass, and we've got them in bathhouses and hammams all over Syria and Egypt. If we wanted to give an aesthetic Sufi interpretation to it, we could say that it's the sky and the heavens and whatnot, but practically it's to let light in, because without it, it's going to be a very, very dark space.
So just to follow up, it looks like it's an irregular pattern, right? It wasn't a repeated or symmetrical pattern, and so I was curious if it was actually supposed to be representational in some way, perhaps of constellations or something along the lines.
Yeah, it would be nice to look back at something like Qusayr Amra and some of the frescoes, the early Islamic frescoes in that desert castle, to see if you've got a pattern of constellations. That's a nice idea, and I don't know. You might want to study that and follow up on that very topic. Great idea.
Bethany, what a great talk. I'm wondering if you would be able to comment a little bit more on what you think the terraces are used for, whether it's for creating roads and walkable areas, whether they're specifically for growing crops or other places to maybe build other buildings or kind of out features associated with farmsteads like this.
Okay. In terms of what we published right now, what is actually in print before the final publication comes out, Yuval and I had an article in an Icona conference volume. It was jointly written with several people on the state of our study of the terraces up to that point. What we can say right now, the terraces, for sampling reasons, for purely methodological reasons, we did not do macrobotanical. We did do phytolith, and I'm waiting for the final phytolith results because we're getting very close to deadline for publication. So I need the phytolith results for this. I know they've got a lot on their plate, so that's fine. The reason we have not incorporated the macrobot for a couple of reasons. One is it is recycled soil is one of them. Now there's ways of solving that problem, I know, but the biggest problem is sampling. The terraces are so small that we just can't do the random sampling that we would need to get this kind of spatial control over that. So a decision was made. What you'll see that also in Jordan is that when you study terraces, it's usually phytoliths that are used rather than the macrobot or a combination of the two. But as far as what was planted, I've got court records. I've got court registers, not for the Mamluk period, unfortunately. But remember, these terraces continue to be built. They're maintained. They're subdivided into smaller plots as more land becomes divided off by inheritance and smaller plots are sold. And we can actually trace changes in land tenure through the physical transformation of those terraces, which is fascinating. On the other hand, we've got Sigilat, Ottoman court records. And those court records are fantastic. There's a whole series of 300 years of these things for Jerusalem. And I've been literally going through them. They're not in Turkish, they're in Arabic. They're through the Jerusalem Sharia court. And they describe day by day registration of land sales. Who's selling to who? Who's buying? Who's putting land together to create larger plots? What are they growing? Or what was grown on them before. And slowly, we're starting to piece together a story. The larger picture is this is orchard agriculture. We go from really a focus on cereal production in the Mamluk period to gardens. And garden agriculture is big money in Jerusalem. It really is one of the rural growth areas. So one can become an individual small-scale farmer entrepreneur without a whole lot of investing a whole lot of money into it by going into market agriculture. And that's one of the big financial success stories of the Ottoman period, especially for Jerusalem.
I have a question about two places in Jerusalem, maybe in relationship to Tanki's.
Let's hear.
You said that he was known for clearing out water systems. I was wondering if there's any evidence of that, whether archaeological or literary. And then I know that the citadel basically takes its shape during the Mamluk period.
Right.
Does he have anything to do with anything, building anything or restoring anything there?
He individually was responsible for those specific institutions that I have listed, but there's a lot of developments of the citadel and of water systems that date to his governorship. So what his role would in that work would be giving permission. And by the way, he controlled all of the endowments. That's rare for a governor. They didn't get involved in that. That was usually clerics that controlled endowments. But he wanted to have his thumb literally on the source of money. And one of those important sources was those endowments. So I would say a supervisory position, but not an active one. Now, you did see a list of a couple of qanats that he did clear out specifically for Damascus. That was specifically ordered by him and supervised by him. Yeah.
Thank you, Bethany. Thank you very much.